Welcome to the Net Zero Carbon Summit. Today we are kicking things off with none other than Ilya Preston, the CEO and co-founder of PAXAFE. Thank you so much for joining us and kicking everything off today.
Thanks for having me, Mary. Great to be here.
I am excited because this really combines two of my favorite things, the world of sustainability and striving for zero emissions, and also my love of cold chain. So before we get too far into everything today, let's get some background on you and kind of how you started PAXAFE.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again for the opportunity. So PAXAFE is about 5.5 years old. I co-founded it with my co-founder, Ashok. Prior to PAXAFE, I spent about a decade on the enterprise side of things. So I spent just about 4 years at a large Fortune 200 industrial manufacturer of engines and engine components, Cummins, as a part of their global supply chain and global supply chain strategy teams. I was in charge of building out global kind of commodity strategies and seeing where synergies within the supply chains existed. And then I moved over and did management consulting after that for a number of years, both at KPMG and PwC. And it was really during my time in consulting where I think the original seed towards what PAXAFE would eventually become was planted. In the latter part of my time in consulting, I was a part of supply chain optimization teams, particularly within the cold chain. So a lot of pharma companies, some produce companies, and really understanding what they were investing in from a digital transformation standpoint. So helping them craft their digital transformation investment strategies. These were investments around TMS, transportation management systems, ERP platforms, and at the time, even the start of visibility platforms. And so our consulting teams were brought in to help them kind of tie all of this information together from all of these various systems and make it operational, right? Make it actionable. And so, we during my time there, I had recognized just how much time, energy, investment they were making into our consulting teams, into their own internal data teams to try and stitch all of this information together. And, that's where the idea for PAXAFE was born. We want to put the cold chain on autopilot, right? We envision a world where, we become the most accurate arbiter of quantifying, predicting, and underwriting supply chain risk. And that's exactly what we're helping companies in the cold chain do today, both on the shipper and the manufacturer side, as well as the logistics service providers.
I think that is such an important thing because obviously the transportation world and the supply chain as we know it is getting a huge kind of technological evolution, if you will, over the last, I would say at least 10 years, considering the advancements people have made. But I think that while the normal dry van and transportation world is getting that, I think cold chain has kind of been left out of it, if you will. Like it's the redheaded stepchild of the transportation world of things, because it's not very fun. It's not very exciting. It's not, it's not like the sexy part of transportation. I don't really know what the sexy part is, but you know what I mean. But I feel like it's really getting that technological overhaul that it really, really needs. And it's getting all of those resources that are making it more efficient, more adaptable, and really just kind of saying, all right, we got it. Like, we're really improving and making things better. But speaking of areas that are for improvement and making things better, over the summer, the University of Michigan released a study that found that improved refrigeration could save over half of the 1.33 billion tons, just like billion with a B, tons of food waste each year globally. And as someone who doesn't like food waste and would like to solve the food insecurity here in the US, that's a lot of food waste. And I know that a lot of it is attributed to supply chain errors, just errors in supply chain. What was kind of the common thread to all of this that really said, okay, this is where all of the waste is going and this is how we're, losing all of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's just maybe take a step back and appreciate what you just said there, right? There's over $750 billion worth of food annually that's scrapped. I think that's excluding fish and seafood, right? So that's produce across the board. 30%, 1/3 of all shipments, essentially food gets scrapped. On the other end of the equation, you have 800 million people all across the world that are considered hungry, that lack a proper access to food. Now, we've seen, to your earlier point, the being the redheaded stepchild and the cold chain, we've seen investments into the cold chain start to become much more accelerated over the last 5 to 10 years. IoT, temperature data loggers, IoT devices, right? Real-time visibility, all of these visibility platforms that are now capturing product in real time, product location and condition streaming. But food loss rates have not improved. The intended outcome of reducing food loss and improving operational efficiencies, and obviously, tying in emissions and reducing emissions associated with that, it hasn't worked. And so that's where we see a huge opportunity. Now, to your question on the study that the University of Michigan had conducted, I think the common thread is that if you optimize the cold chain, you're going to see a reduction in product loss. You're going to see, therefore, reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, right? But I think the nuanced part of that conversation is that it's all in the details. There's so much nuance and specific details that there's no silver bullet to cure this. There are so many different factors that need to be considered. Regions, right? Modes of transport, types of products, how sensitive those types of products are to the supply chain, what their temperature tolerances are. Different products emit different amounts of, or are tied to emitting different amounts of greenhouse gas, right? So when you can't take a broad brush and say, I want to reduce product waste, therefore I want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of nuance in terms of how much each product contributes towards emissions. And that leads to the broader point of you need to determine as a company, as a government, right, as a country, what are you trying to optimize for? Are you trying to optimize for financial improvements or financial gains? Are you trying to optimize for humanitarian needs? Are you trying to optimize for environmental factors? I think that's really the biggest takeaway from the study is, yes, broadly speaking, driving optimization of cold chain will drive improvements to your loss rates and therefore downstream to your greenhouse gas emissions, but very, very different proportions. And you need to understand the nuances and get really into the weeds on the data, on the loss rate data, where it's happening, how it's happening, the root causes, to understand which levers and which investments to make for each particular region and for each particular product type.
I think that is incredibly important because like you said, if you just say, okay, well, I'm going to get this brand new warehouse inventory system. It's going to tell me XYZ is here, XYZ is there. It's going to have all of this optimized to store all of my stuff. Well, that's great if that's the problem. But if you don't know that that's the problem, then you'll spend all this money, optimize your warehouse, but then you'll still have things falling apart on trucks, on things where maybe your reefer units with one specific carrier that hauls a lot of your freight doesn't set it to continuous, or they continually have breakdowns, or there's traffic, or it takes too long for the warehouse to load them. Like, there's so many other different factors and different points in the journey of that goods life that could be the reason that it's contributing to ultimately that waste.
Yeah, and there's obvious, I think, factors such as the ones that you just pointed out. There's also non-obvious factors, right? Like, there's a big difference in the quality of refrigeration that's available and accessible all over the world. There's a big difference in where refrigeration investment is needed relative to how industrialized or how economically rich a country is. More industrialized nations need better refrigeration investments towards the end of the supply chain journey around distribution, around retail. That's the inverse of less industrialized nations. A lot of the refrigeration challenges, I think 40% of the food loss occurs post harvesting. So it needs to be much more front loaded into the manufacturing part of the workflow and the process. So again, really digging into the root causes and understanding the baseline of what you're working with, of your own network's performance, of your country's performance, depending on what the lens is and who you are in terms of making these decisions. That's the only way you're going to know how to make viable and responsible investment decisions into the cold chain.
So if I'm sitting here and I'm looking at, I want to start optimizing things. I want to improve, whether I'm let's say like on a country or a state level, because that feels easier to manage. Or even if I'm a shipper and I just want to increase, I just want to, reduce the amount of waste that my products are having. How do I even start to kind of achieve that optimization? Do I just sit back and take a look at where things are falling apart on my own before I go get some software? Or do I just go find an expert in the field and ask them to help me?
Yeah, so I think what you first need to do is to establish a baseline of your network's performance. And the best way, the easiest way, some of the most common ways to do that is to figure out which technologies you can adopt to get you a raw source of data, right? So it's in the supply chain, that could be IoT devices, right? At the storage locations, it could be temperature loggers or really highly accurate temperature thermometers associated with refrigerations or refrigerators or refrigerated rooms, right? It could be light sensors that are attached to refrigerator doors that can tell you, when refrigerators are open, right? So I think it's understanding the baseline as number one, but number two, before you can start to move towards optimization, you need to go back to the question of what are you optimizing for? There is no silver bullet. If you're trying to optimize for financial returns or financial gains, you're probably going to focus on how much does food cost? What percentage of food waste is there? You're going to be looking at things like, meat, for example. It accounts for 10% of global loss, but it accounts on the flip side, it accounts for 50% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So yeah, I could invest into reducing the loss rates of meat. I'm not going to get that much of a return on the actual quantity of meat that I save, but I'm going to get a ton environmentally speaking, right? Whereas fruits and vegetables, they make up 30% of the volume of loss in terms of food, but they only account for like 9% of the emissions gases, right? So you need to determine what's most important to you and what are you trying to optimize for. There's also a humanitarian component to this. So, which regions have supply shortages of various types of foods, right? Nutrients associated with those foods, fruits and vegetables is a big one that I think people need access to globally. And then, some of those sensitivities and specifics that come into play into the logistics part of the equation. Fruits and vegetables, what temperature ranges do they need to be shipped at, right? How difficult is it to ship those? What are the loss ratios? As I just shared, 30% of all of those fruits and vegetables are scrapped, are lost. So they're difficult to ship. And so I think when you're making those optimization decisions, you need to understand the baseline. You need to use that baseline to understand what you're optimizing for. And then you need to have a method to essentially a trade-off calculator to figure out what it is that you need to invest in specifically.
I like that you really broke it down and kind of made it kind of act like an actionable insight, if you will, like figure out what's important to you and just go from there. Because obviously, everyone, depending on if you're a shipper or a country or a local community, you're all going to have different goals. Ideally, they would all line up together with the same positive outcome, but still, like you're going to have different goals.
And I know you mentioned, countries. You also need to consider your population, right? And in terms of, the U.S., in terms of losses, food loss, the loss rates in North America are amongst the lowest in the world, right? Relative to Africa, relative to Asia and Latin America, food loss is much more prevalent there. But if you incorporate food loss on a per capita basis, the U.S. is at the forefront, right? So in terms of, I feel like I'm a victim of this monthly. I was just sharing a recent experience that I had just over Labor Day weekend. I had to throw meat away 2 days before the sell-by date because of discoloration. It was pretty funky. It smelled really bad. I'm not going to eat that. I was actually cooking it making it for my dogs, but even there, I'm not going to let them eat that. There's impact from that. From me personally, this has happened several times in the last months, and I'm probably as a consumer not going to shop at that particular retailer for a while. But yeah, it impacts every part of the value chain.
It really does. And I mean, I think I would love to see a world where I never thought I'd see under 1 billion tons of food waste, but I think that with that much, I think just getting under 1 billion to me would be like the good start, because obviously we can't cut it in half overnight, because that would be basically impossible.
Yeah, and I think you could if that's your goal, right? You need to look by region or by country as well. You're going to get the biggest bang for your buck across certain food types and across certain regions. So I think like meat, fruits and vegetables, maybe nuts, fall into those categories of foods that if you're going to invest in cold chain infrastructure and improved refrigeration and improved temperature control, those are some of your highest yield foods where you're going to be able to save the most, both from a food loss perspective and from an emissions perspective. And then regionally speaking as well, right? Africa, Asia, Latin America, those are the countries where food loss is most prevalent, and they have really, really, dense and high populations. So I think those are some of the filters that you're kind of cutting across, or when you're making these decisions, is what food am I dealing with, where am I going to focus my investment, what region am I dealing with, which country, and what can I optimize for within that specific country.
That is kind of the good and the bad thing about a global supply chain. Is with a global supply chain, you can get your fruits and veggies pretty much any time of the year, depending on what growing season has what. But then that bad side is, when there is when you do have that truly global supply chain, then, you have other countries that are like, you have to work and adapt to problems that are happening in those other countries. Even if they don't necessarily affect you, you do have to adapt and work to some of the issues that they have, because that's the part of a global supply chain, is that it's all global and everybody impacts everybody.
That's right. And I think the study even mentioned, right, there's certainly a reduced risk from a failure mode perspective, from an emissions perspective. There's a reduction in localized supply chain. So basically there's a correlation between the length of your supply chain and the likelihood that your food is going to experience loss, and of course, the amount of emissions associated with that particular part of the supply chain. So, but localized supply chains, I think they make sense where you can afford to set them up. But everything comes with a trade-off, right? Localized supply chains may not be as cheap. Availability of raw materials and certain foods may not be as prevalent. even like weather or environmental factors may not be conducive to growing or to harvesting certain types of food in certain parts of the world. So it's not realistic and not feasible to obviously have localized supply chains everywhere. But there are opportunities where you can really assess where can I localize certain aspects of my supply chain and reduce some of those failure modes that exist today in global supply chains.
Yeah, it would be great if everything was just 5 miles down the street, because you don't really have you don't experience, like, there's not that much degradation of quality or emissions of transporting something 5 miles down the street. But sadly, that is not the world that we live in, as much as from a textbook point of view, it would make sense.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always like to joke. I'm probably DoorDash's biggest customer. I think like 90% of my meals are DoorDashed, and if everything was DoorDash available, certainly the time, the lead times, the complexities, the failure modes would not be what they are in the produce supply chain today.
We should just get DoorDash on it. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
They have other things to do.
great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone has any questions for you outside the summit, where can they find you?
Yeah, look me up on LinkedIn, Ilya Preston. Please, go visit PAXAFE.com, our website. You can look up PAXAFE on LinkedIn and follow along our journey. I think our marketing team, led by Ivan Castro, is starting to pump out some really great content. We have a blog on our website, and follow along, please. We're very passionate about the cold chain, both on the healthcare side and the produce side. There's a lot of opportunity in both of these industries, right? So we definitely want to be a driving force in trying to push towards zero loss of food, and setting up the most optimized supply chains possible.
Alrighty, thank you so much. Stay tuned, everyone. We have some amazing content coming your way for the rest of the Net Zero Carbon Summit.